In the streets of Germany, we spot a mob of men as they chase a monster through the town, with that same creature thinking the same of them. Believing he might have been safer living back at the carnival, Kurt Wagner decides that if he dies, it will at least be as a man as he leaps onto the side of a building, climbing it as the mob crowds around, brandishing torches and crosses. However, the riled-up villagers set fire to the house, and Kurt, who only wanted to learn from them, dives from the fiery remains and tackles one of the attackers to show them how vicious he can be as they crowd around him before subduing him as one of the men shout for someone to quickly bring a stake. As they bring the wood and hammer, a voice commands them to stop, and Kurt is confused as to what's happened when Charles appears, claiming responsibility for stopping the mob when he's asked why. Hearing that he wanted to learn, he reveals he's the teacher of a school of mutants and offers to teach the demonic-looking man when Kurt asks if he can be normal as he decides to join the professor. Turning to Quebec, we enter a secret military base where Weapon X resides as he enters a conference room to meet with someone. That person is none other than Xavier, though Wolverine isn't impressed as his commander says he has an offer for him. His interest piqued, Charles reveals he knows of his run-in with the Hulk and of his powers, and says he's in desperate need of mutants. Wondering about his current position though, Charles says he'll be a free agent, and seeing his chance to get out of government control, accepts the professor's offer when the commander stops him. Threatening to lock him up if he walks out, Wolverine pops a single claw and swipes at the man, resigning immediately. The commander warns that they'll hear from them again, but Wolverine isn't scared as he leaves with Xavier. We then change to Tennessee to find Banshee as he is filled in by Charles and agrees to help, wanting to do good once again. Not long after, in Kenya, a stream of men approach a stone doorway praying to the goddess of storms, Ororo, who appears before them asking what they want. Told that their lands face drought and that they'll sacrifice animals in exchange for rain, she refuses the offering but still gives the rain willingly as the skies darken around her. Soaring away on the strong winds, lightning flies from her as she's elated to be among the elements. In response to her feelings, rain gushes heavily onto the ground to the cheers of the people as she returns to the earth. There to greet her is a familiar figure who startles the goddess as he's come to make her an offer. Telling her that though she has land and love, he offers her a world that might hate her but is in need of her abilities, as he reveals that she's merely a mutant. Thinking quickly on his words, she decides to join him, feeling it's time to leave anyway. Turning to Japan, Charles meets with Shiro Yoshida, who, though he doesn't owe the professor any favors, feels it might be time for the world to once again hear from Sunfire. We then swap to Lake Baikal in Siberia to a farm where a man named Peter is shouted at to look at his sister. Turning, to his horror, he sees a runaway tractor is heading towards her. Charging forward, the young man rushes after her while transforming from flesh and blood to steel. As the machine continues unabated, Peter manages to grab his sister from its path, but seeing that there's no time to move, stands before the oncoming vehicle. It crashes into him, flying apart while he stands without a scratch on him or his sister when he hears a voice in his head saying it wants to talk to him. He learns that Charles wants him to go to America with him to help the world that needs him, and he goes to his parents, seeking guidance on what he should do when his father tells him to do what his heart tells him, and Peter chooses to join the professor. The pair leave as we turn to Camp Verde in Arizona, where we find John Proudstar, a descendant of the Apache, as he is chasing down a buffalo, thinking of how his people should be running through the plains instead of sitting on reservations. Managing to catch up to the bison, he grabs its horns and wrestles it to the ground. He then hears someone and turns to find Charles sitting behind him, and though curious how he got there, warns him to leave when Xavier offers to help him bring pride to the Apache and tells him of him being a mutant. Not interested though, he has no obligation to help the white man who's plagued his people when Charles plays on his ego, inferring that the Apache have become nothing but scared children. John turns and wants to prove him wrong, deciding to join him as the professor thinks to himself as to whether the new X-Men he's gathered will be able to help. Returning to Westchester, the newly formed team of mutants marvel at their new costumes as Charles explains that they're made of unstable molecules so that they fit perfectly. Sunfire then speaks up, wanting to know why they were gathered together, though Charles doesn't want to explain until the last member has arrived, the one who can explain the situation best when Scott Summers enters the room. Cyclops then proceeds to inform them that the original X-Men have disappeared, but before he continues, decides to show them from the beginning and guides them to Cerebro, explaining how it functions. Recollecting, he remembers Cerebro violently activating, and Charles sees that a new mutant has been detected on the island of Krakoa as he sends them off quickly to find them first, and the team rush out, boarding their jet. On board, Jean had hoped they could contact Beast, but Cyclops says he doesn't have time for them since he graduated. Shortly, they reach the island and land on it gently, and disembarking, Iceman jokes about the surrounding area when Scott warns him to stop bantering and that they need to find the mutant, when Angel chimes in that they have no idea what they're looking for. Cyclops orders them to spread out when the others hear Polaris shout, and they all look except him and misses what attacks them. Awakening with a headache, confusion surrounds him as he worries about the whereabouts of his friends when he notices that his eyes are no longer covered. He realizes, however, that try as he might, he can no longer shoot out his optic blasts when he sees that he's back on the jet with the autopilot locked, preventing him from returning to the island. Forced to make his way back home, Charles asks where the others are when he arrives and proceeds to explain what he can. At that moment, though, his optic powers began to return as he's instructed to grab a set of lenses to stop them when they unleash with more power than ever, and he's thrown back from the sheer strength of them. Finishing his story with having had to retrain himself while the professor grabbed the others, Wolverine wants to know what happens next when Cyclops tells him that they'll head back to Krakoa, though Sunfire decides he wants no part in the plan. Cyclops wants to know why, as Sunfire replies that he has no interest in risking his life for other mutants, and not wanting to argue, Scott takes the others and they board the jet. Inside, Aurora isn't too thrilled about what she's seen so far, and Proudstar agrees. Just then, they spot something outside following them, and as it approaches, it's none other than the figure of Sunfire wanting into the ship. Once aboard, Kurt insinuates that he simply didn't want to go home alone, but Shiro says he has his own reasons for rejoining the group. A few hours later, they arrive at the desolate island of Krakoa, and as they land, Cyclops reveals that Xavier has given them all code names. He pairs them all together, Colossus with Storm, Wolverine with Banshee, and Sunfire with Nightcrawler, instructing them to search different parts of the island while pairing himself with Thunderbird. Telling the first team to get ready, he proceeds to drop each of them off when Colossus jumps out towards their area. Storm soars after and catches him, though he wasn't worried as Thunderbird notes that they've begun arguing as Cyclops lands them onto their side of Krakoa. Disembarking, Cyclops quickly ascertains which way they need to go, and though Thunderbird grumbles, he follows when Scott realizes he forgot the mini Cerebro on the ship. However, when he turns around, the jet has disappeared. Trying to understand what happened, Cyclops notes a temple that mysteriously appeared in the distance that wasn't there when they landed and decides to search it. Reluctantly following along, Thunderbird is suddenly attacked by the vines of the forest, only for Cyclops to be assaulted as well. However, John manages to grapple the tendrils while Scott blasts them all off, freeing themselves, allowing them to finish their trip to the temple while the leader worries of how the others are doing. On the north side of the island, Storm also notes the newly spotted temple and they move to investigate it when an avalanche begins around them, forcing them to run, though Colossus sees it change direction towards them. Seeing their only choice is to defend themselves, Colossus grabs a tree, swinging it towards the oncoming stones, and thanking him for the help, Aurora begins blowing the rocks away with the wind, dropping them into the ocean. Shortly later, they meet up with Cyclops and Thunderbird. On the eastern side, Wolverine and Banshee are attacked by giant crustaceans. Leaping forward, the short Canadian mutant unleashes his claws and begins making short work of the crabs when he asks Sean if he's going to help or simply watch. Already airborne though, Cassidy uses his sonic screech on the remaining enemies, and seeing that they're done, proceed to meet up with the others. The last group has run into troubles of their own as Nightcrawler and Sunfire are assaulted by giant birds as they argue with each other. One comes dangerously close to striking Nightcrawler when he disappears in a puff of smoke and brimstone, appearing again behind it as Sunfire mocks him for his ability being fitting to his appearance. Shiro, though, continues shooting at the birds until they're finished, and they're also able to reach the stone temple along with everyone else. The group head into the temple, only to be met with a stone door that's sealed tight, and turning to the others, Cyclops instructs Colossus, Storm, and Sunfire to break through, which proves easy for them. Looking past the rubble, though, the team are shocked at the sight before them. They spot the original team suspended when Colossus notes that tendrils seem to be feeding off of them. Scott urges them to quickly remove the others when Wolverine shouts that the ground started shaking as soon as the unconscious mutants were freed, and they hurry to leave before the temple falls apart. Making it safely outside, the others come to, and Angel demands to know why they came back, stating that it was all a trap for him to bring other mutants there when the ground begins rising, revealing that the mutant they were looking for was the island itself. Sending out images, the X-Men learn that due to the result of atomic testing, the island was bathed in radiation and it grew a consciousness of its own. Krakoa grew hungry and upon the X-Men's arrival, captured and began feeding on them when it released one of them so that he would bring more food. Krakoa speaks of how he'll finally be sated and that he used Xavier to gather the new team. Finished talking, he's ready to feed as he unleashes a beam from his eye and the mutants scatter. However, while the others run, Wolverine dashes in to bring the fight to the island. As the Flyers soar around, they find that their various powers are of no use against the island, though they fight on. At that moment, Charles contacts Scott, warning him that he's fighting it wrong and that he's discovered its weakness as he shares his plan, then concentrating, joins the battle himself. While the professor occupies its mind, Cyclops gives Storm her orders and she begins summoning her namesake, taking control of the crackling electricity and shoots them downward into Polaris, restoring her magnetic powers. Screaming in agony, Lorna yells for them to not stop when Havoc screams that she'll be killed if they don't. Scott, however, is unable to sacrifice the world for a single person, much to the frustration of his brother. Banshee shouts that Krakoa is getting even stronger when Charles finds its mind getting more powerful as well and is unable to continue the fight as the island reveals that the rains only prove to restore its strength. Rearing up to strike, the X-Men quickly rush in to fight back as Jean hopes that the Professor's plan works as Cyclops calls everyone back and initiates their strategy as both Havoc and himself fire upon the barely visible figure of Lorna. Lorna's power then shoots downwards into the earth violently, causing an immediate effect on Krakoa, who is no longer able to hold its form, and seeing that the plan is working, Cyclops warns that they have seconds to abandon the island as Iceman grabs the unconscious Polaris. Rushing through the woods, Thunderbird is taken aback, seeing that the whole island is breaking apart, and reaching the beach, find their jet is gone when Bobby improvises and creates a raft for them to get on. Once aboard, Cyclops and Havoc propel them all away from land, as behind them, Lorna's attack finally affects the island, causing gravity to disappear, shooting it into space when it tries to come back down. The missing island, though, causes a giant whirlpool to try to fill the previous space, as Scott yells for everyone to hold on. Thinking quickly, the leader orders Iceman to create an airtight dome around themselves. Thrown violently around, the mutants inside shout in pain as they are pulled into the depths of the ocean. When minutes later, the raft breaks the surface and Cyclops opens the dome with a blast. Glad to be alive, the jet also surfaces and Angel flies over to start it up. Then, once everyone's aboard, Angel apologizes for the cramped conditions while also wondering what's going to happen with so many X-Men.